Every public company's R&D number is a lie hiding in plain sight. Not because anybody falsified it, because the number was never built to tell the truth. It was built to satisfy an accounting standard written in 1974. And for 50 years, boards, analysts, and CEOs have been making billion-dollar innovation decisions based on a number designed by accountants to solve a completely different problem. Here's what makes this genuinely strange. The real number does exist. The government has been collecting it from every major US company for decades. It would answer the question that every innovation leader, every board member, every investor would actually need that information to make their own decisions. But it's locked away by federal law. Confidential, never published, never seen by the people who need it most. It's sitting in a federal database right now. But there's a way to estimate it for any public company without asking anybody's permission. I know it exists because I spent years building it from the inside. When I was running innovation at HP, we discovered this problem firsthand. We had a connection between R&D investment and gross margin that held up across decades of HP history, and better than anything Wall Street was using. But the signal wasn't quite clear, not as clear as I would like it. It was actually blurry. None of us could figure out why. The answer came from a question someone on my team asked, almost kind of as an aside. What if R&D isn't one thing? Think about what actually lives inside of a typical R&D budget. There's a team somewhere investigating whether a new approach could enable a capability that just doesn't exist yet. No product defined, no spec written, asking whether something is even possible. And there's a team building the next version of a product that ships in 18 months. Spec locked, timeline set, engineering executing against a defined target. Now, both show up on the same line in the budget. Both are called R&D. Both count equally toward the number that gets reviewed every quarter. But they are not the same thing. One is research, the other is development. Research is the work you do when you don't yet know what you're building. The output is understanding, new knowledge that might enable future products that nobody's ever designed. You can't know exactly what you'll find. If you already knew, it wouldn't be research. Development is the work you do when you know exactly what you're building. The spec exists, the product is defined. The question isn't what to make. It's whether it can be made on time, at cost, at quality. One creates the future, the other delivers the present. And for 50 years, every public company in America has been required to report them as one indistinguishable number. When we split the HP data along that line, research on one side, development on the other, the signal sharpened immediately. Research spend, measured against gross margin 3 to 5 years later, was a meaningfully stronger predictor than the combined number had ever been. That blur had not been in the gross margin data, it had been in the R&D number itself. Two fundamentally different things averaged together, producing a number that looked precise and predicts almost nothing. But splitting R&D at the company level was only the beginning. The model was still lying to us, just more quietly. Even with the split, something was still soft. HP wasn't one business. It was dozens. Printers, PCs, servers, software, each running on different timelines, different technology cycles, different competitive dynamics. What if the R&D split meant something different depending on where it was applied? We pushed it into the product line level, then further down to the platform level within product lines. Printers were the clearest example. HP printers businesses wasn't one story. They were platforms built on established technologies, mature ink systems, proven printhead chemistries, products that had been shipping for years. And there were platforms built on genuinely new core technology, requiring new chemistry, new mechanisms, new approaches to fundamental problems that nobody had solved yet. Research and investment by platform told a completely different story than research investment by product category. The research going into new technology platforms had a completely different relationship to future margin than research going into mature, established shipping platforms. Different time horizons, different risk profiles, different margin implications years down the road. Laptops told the same story. A traditional consumer laptop line and a high-performance portable workstation were not the same investment. One was development heavy, it was a defined product, known market, engineering, executing against a spec. The other had genuine research behind it, unsolved thermal problems, new form factor constraints, and materials questions that hadn't been answered yet. When a single R&D assumption is applied across all of that, treating every dollar the same regardless of what it actually does, the signal disappears into the average. Peanut buttering that number across that portfolio does not work. The model only gets honest when it gets specific. Research by platform and development by platform, matched against the margin performance of those specific platforms years later. Which platforms were building the future margin? Which ones were running on margin that past research had already bought? What could see if because we were inside the company? That was our aha, was that, yeah, we could see this because we had the numbers. Now the question is whether anyone on the outside could ever see the same thing. Outside the internal budget process, everyone sees the same thing, a single line on the income statement. The US government recognized decades ago that the combined R&D number was analytically useless. So they built a system to collect the real one. The National Science Foundation runs a survey called Business Enterprise Research and Development Survey, or the BIRD survey. Every year, roughly 47,500 U.S. companies are required to report their R&D spending broken into three categories: basic research, applied research, and experimental development. The split that every board and every investor needs to see. Mandatory, it comes from every company, it's collected, it's verified, you have history, and then it's locked away. The firm level data is confidential under federal law. The NSF publishes only industry level aggregates. So every company fills out this survey and reports its real R&D split to the government. And that data sits in some federal database. And the boards, the investors, the analysts who need it most cannot access it. Now, researchers at Northwestern and Boston University were given rare access to that confidential data. And what they found is striking. When companies they face financial pressure, bad quarter, bad year, the economy struggling, right? When they quote cut R&D, they never cut D. They cut R almost entirely. Development barely moves. Every earnings squeeze, every activist campaign, every cost optimization, systematically targeting the one part of R&D that builds future margin. And because the combined number barely moves, nobody on the outside sees it happening. That's not a coincidence. That's an accounting standard doing exactly what it was designed to do. Produce one clean number for the income statement. It was never asked to protect the future. Now, so what can we actually be done without access to this locked data? More than people realize. I'm going to give you a series of steps to take where you can estimate and one, validate your own number, but now you can take it and estimate it any public company. So, step one, find the industry baseline for your industry. The aggregate bird data is public at the sector level. Use an AI tool like Claude for the R&D development ratio for the relevant industry, for your industry. That's the benchmark. And you can use, just say your company, say, what's the R&D development ratio for the industry of which HP is a participant in? It'll return you what that number is. It doesn't tell you the number, it tells you the percentage. Now, everything else gets measured against it. A company spending 8% on its R&D on research in an industry where the average is 25% is telling you something the combined number never would. Step two, look at the gross margin trend compared to peers. Gross margin over time is the most honest external signal of research health. A company with a declining margin relative to peers while reporting flat or growing R&D spend is almost certainly shifting the mix towards development. The math works in the other direction too. Now, an AI tool like Claude again can pull this comparison from any public company literally in seconds. This is exactly the signal that was invisible at HP until it was too late. Now, step three, look at the patent trends compared to peers over time. Patents they're imperfect, but it could be a useful directional indicator. Not because more patents always means more research, it doesn't. But a sustained decline in patent output relative to peers alongside flat R&D spend suggests the investment is maintaining existing products rather than creating new knowledge. Combined with gross margin trend, it starts to triangulate where the split actually sits. None of these three steps requires access to an internal budget within your organization. All of them can be done in an afternoon with public data and an AI tool. Together, they produce a working picture of the R&D split that the income statement was never designed to reveal. Now, let's back up. When Hurd took over in 2005, Mark Hurd, HP was spending $3.5 billion on R&D. Roughly, call it 4% of revenue, even though I hate using that metric. Now, if you go back to the previous episodes, I talked about my argument, my ongoing fight with Mark Hurd, right? But by 2009, his last full year as CEO had dropped to $2.8 billion. That's right. Absolute dollar spend went from 3.5 to 2.8 over 4 years. Revenue had grown significantly over that period, so the percentage had fallen further still to under 2.5%. So both the dollar amount and the ratio were declining simultaneously while the company got larger. Wall Street tracked the combined number. The board reviewed it. Nobody raised a structural alarm. I was. This was my one big regret as the CTO at HP, was not fighting harder against Mark Hurd on this. The research component within that total was well below the industry average for comparable technology companies, not slightly. We're talking significantly. And the margin consequences arrived years later. Trust me, the margin consequences when you cut R always will appear. They always do. There's a time lag, but you will get bit by it. The R and the D split gave us a real predictive signal. Now, we ran with it. The conversations were sharper, but the team kept pulling on a thread that nobody had actually expected. When we looked closely at what was actually being called research, project by project and budget line by budget line, things that didn't feel the same kept appearing. Work aimed at fundamental discovery and then work aimed at solving a specifically defined problem using entirely new methods. Two different types, but they're both labeled research. Up close, they behave differently, predicted different things, and when budgets get tight, got treated very differently. So we went looking for an agreed definition. How do you define R&D, right? There's this, the National Science Foundation has these buckets, but how is it actually defined? What's the official standard that would tell exactly where to draw the line inside of even research? Guess what? It doesn't exist. Not the way we needed to as innovation leaders. And without it, everything we'd built was sitting on sand. How do you build a predictive model on a definition that just doesn't exist? That's the next episode. Now, if this helped you see something you might have missed, subscribe and if you're watching this on the YouTube or wherever you get your podcast, hit that like, subscribe, and share it with somebody. On YouTube, make sure you hit that bell so that you don't miss and you don't miss getting notified. And if you want to go deeper every Monday, join us over on Studio Notes for free. That's the newsletter, gets sent out every time we publish over at philmckinney.com. And until next time, see the pattern. Don't just assume the information is going to jump out and tell you what to do. Look and see the patterns and do the hardest step. Make the call. We'll see you next week. Bye-bye.